there. Welcome to Rested Mamas Talk. We're Chelsea
and Mica, your certified pediatric sleep coaches who were once exhausted mamas just like you turned into rested mamas who now have helped hundreds of families get better sleep in 3 days with an alternative to traditional sleep training.
As creators of the Association Fading Sleep Method, we teach a responsive and holistic approach. Our podcast is dedicated to sharing the journey from true parental exhaustion to thriving parenthood.
From real sleep tips from us and other experts to real stories of families just like you.
Let's get rested. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Rested Mamas Talk. My name is Chelsea, and it is so great to have you here today. Hello, Mica.
Hello, and I am Mica. We're talking about some really big topics today. I am excited.
Are you excited? Okay, so this is actually a very big, I think, is a little bit of an understating word for this topic today. And at times, honestly, it can be pretty polarizing. I think that there are lots of different, opinions and, areas of thought around this. And that is really surrounding.
Right.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Feelings, just in general.
Yeah.
This is a huge topic that honestly, Chelsea and I love to talk about and educate families on. And the question is that we get all the time.
Does my child need to cry for hours in order to sleep train?
Yeah.
And that's kind of at the heart.
Is it bad? Does that mean it's bad? There's so many opinions. Today we're going to talk about the data.
And what not only the data, but also for sure the data, but also what are our experiences with it? What are our clients' experiences with it as well? I think that is also something that is important to talk about because, I mean, you can go, right, Mica, you can go and look at countless studies out there. I mean, even we can Google it today and there are, hundreds, dozens out there about crying and sleep training. And, but, let's kind of really bring it down almost a level and really talk about how it relates to us as parents, and kind of go from there. So, Mica, do you remember? So we actually recently talked to a fairly good sized group of our former clients, and we were really kind of looking at not only why they decided to work with us, but, what were some of their thoughts going into sleep training and what were some of
stopped them, right?
What stopped them? Yeah, 100%. And one of the questions that we got a lot was because, us guys, we do not use cried out method. That's not a method that we use. We do provide an alternative for that. And so the topic of crying came up quite a bit, right, Mica, in these conversations with these previous clients. And it was really interesting because we were really able to actually get to the core of what crying meant for them. Like we talk about all the time with our clients, how do you feel about crying? What are your emotions around that? But really, what did they associate crying to mean? And I found it was so interesting to me because, and some of our clients were even like, oh gosh, I don't even think I've really even thought about that. Because when we
moves fast, right? It goes from sleep training to, sleep training means a lot of crying and a lot of crying is bad. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. But why is it bad? Why do you feel like it was bad? Or why is it hard for you as a parent with, to hear the crying or to, to be around crying? And, just to share, I don't know, Mica, if we can kind of share just a couple of things, but sometimes, some of our clients said that, they associated that with that they weren't doing what they should be doing for their child, that they were neglecting them in some way. We had another client that said they associate that with that they were having feelings of trauma, that it was a traumatic experience for them. And so it was really nice to actually kind of take a minute to dive into that, right? Was crying something that was of because we get the spectrum, right? We get clients that are like, oh my gosh, crying, I cannot stand hearing my child cry. And then I get the clients like, oh, I don't really care too much about crying. Where did you fall in with that, with your first
I mean, I was right in the middle. We talked
yeah,
about this in another podcast
podcast?
with Emily on mom guilt. And part of the issue is that it is such a polarizing topic. And
Mhm.
there are so many articles around there that generalize a lot of things that lead you to the point of your baby is crying, crying is bad.
Right.
And that's really hard when you already kind of feel like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Mhm, right. Yeah.
Kind of a new
I
thing.
think I'm doing the right thing,
Yeah,
but
it's
then
so
like, yeah.
I mean, from a spectrum perspective, I like to think I'm pretty pragmatic, and the
Mhm.
mom guilt is always there. I don't like to hear my children cry, but I also know that's part of a general emotion, and it's their way of communicating something. And so that also means I have to stop and pause and figure out what is it they're actually communicating. Um,
Well,
I'm
and
not
that's
in the middle. I'm in
yeah, and that's actually something that I think is important and something that we talk a lot about within kind of, what we do. And that is actually why, like the reason behind your child is crying when you begin the process of changing your routines and sleep training and really working towards better sleep. And it really is surrounding just a lot of times in the initial beginning. We've also talked about this in another podcast is your child is just a little confused, right?
wait, before we go into that,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
I think it's important. So we even say, right, sleep training, the word sleep training is so thrown out there, right?
It's so used.
So generalized. So
Yeah.
let's break it down first. If you're listening to this and you're trying to figure out, okay, what is it that Mica and Chelsea are actually trying to say? This is where it stems from. You Google sleep training.
Mhm.
General practice of sleep training is what?
Cry it out.
Cry it out. What is cry it out?
So
Cry it
cry it
out.
out is extinction. So
What
it
is extinction?
what is extinction? Love it. So extinction is where you extinct your presence in response to your child.
You
So
leave your child
you
in
leave
their room after
to
bedtime.
cry.
Just literally let them cry until they find their journey from awake to drowsy to
Mhm.
a right. So
Yeah.
it's unregulated. I'll call it unregulated learning. Okay, for some
Yeah.
families, some cultures, that is a thing, and that is we
Yeah.
know Chelsea and I. We do not shame things.
No,
Okay,
and we don't honestly, we don't even knock cry it out as like a method that you should or shouldn't use. I mean, it definitely, we always say that whenever you're kind of approaching this, this journey of
for
sleep,
your family.
whatever is right for your family. And sometimes that does mean cry out. And it's what extinction is. You lay baby down or you lay your child down,
Sleep.
and you walk out and you essentially do not go back to them at all, period,
There's there's Ferber.
which is intermittent checks.
Total
Yep.
extinction, which is also known as leave and check.
Hmm.
And that is when you do that, but you check in every, 10 to 15 minutes. Those are the most popular sleep training methods that are out there, which I will say is at least a good majority of the programs that you will learn. Okay. So knowing that, and that is a common conception, guess
Because
what?
they are a lot of times synonymous.
Yeah,
So sleep training equals
cry it out or
cried
fervor.
out or fervor.
And
Yes.
that sometimes means, and you're going to see that, right? There's a lot of crying. And sometimes, especially cry it out, that means there's a lot of unregulated crying. So
Correct.
now let's take that thought and then
Mhm.
break it down to if you are talking about longer periods of unregulated crying and then generalize the idea of prolonged crying.
What is prolonged crying?
So
Mika, what is that definition?
talk about that. So let's lay out prolonged crying, right? When you think of that in your head, you just think, oh, it's a long time. It is actually medically defined as daily, uncontrolled,
crying without obvious cause persistent for at least 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
That's a lot of crying. Okay. That's a
That is
lot of,
a lot of crying.
and so take that. Okay. Let's just like really boil out why all this feels like it's wrong. Then there's cry it out. You think prolonged crying. And guess where else prolonged crying and studies have stemmed from? Unregulated
Regulated. Yeah.
crying from Russian orphans. Honestly, that was
No, there's like, that's like one of the first studies that came out of it. Yeah.
hey, tell everyone about this study. Tell everyone about this study.
Well, in full disclosure, I haven't looked at it in quite a little while, but they actually took, do you remember what year it was done?
Oh my gosh, a long time ago.
Like decades. Yeah, decades ago. And basically they were looking at the effect of crying specifically in children and infants in an orphanage that was, I would probably say, pretty unregulated, most likely very understaffed, and the amount of response that each child got, frankly, was very minimal. So there was not only the level of just reduced human interaction, frankly, as well as they were also looking at the crying aspect as a whole. You know what I'm saying? So can you want to share what that study found?
Well, I mean, obviously,
Obviously.
Bad, right?
Yeah, so, obviously it was bad.
Because that was prolonged crying, and not
Yeah.
just for sleep training, like it was prolonged crying.
It was neglect. I mean, there was like neglectful. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it was an orphanage, right? Like there's going to be some impacts later. And that study about increased cortisol having lasting impacts on an infant somehow found its way into sleep training, tried out, and it was used as a support of sleep training. Again, sleep training, general sleep training for Cry It Out being harmful, in which you will actually see that those who created the study for that orphanage on cortisol on infants, will actually came out and said our study was misused.
Yeah.
It was misused.
Yeah.
So, I mean, okay, still nobody wants to hear prolonged crying, right? But on the other hand, right? So let's now talk about specific, why is that crying different than general sleep training crying?
Yeah. So, and you actually mentioned cortisol levels. Okay. So I think that's an important thing to kind of talk about. So within our realm of working with a lot of clients, we do talk about cortisol levels and melatonin, right? Melatonin, which I think a lot of people know out there is, that sleep hormone to help you to fall asleep, right? Cortisol level is actually technically a stress hormone. It is what your body releases in times of stress and is actually needed for survival. It is needed because it also is the hormone that allows you to wake up, to arouse. And so, we talk a lot about how cortisol levels naturally increase in those early morning hours because it is biological to help your body to wake up. Well, and so that study, and actually a lot of other studies, have looked at though kind of the effect of crying and that stress hormone of cortisol in connection of learning how to sleep. And it was really interesting. Actually, I was reading an article not that long ago, Mica, and the AAP actually discusses 3 different types of stress responses. There's a positive stress response, there's a tolerable stress response, and then there's also a toxic stress response. So, when we're talking about prolonged crying, that would really fall more under the toxic stress response, where there is just an overall heightened increased level of cortisol. However, that's not to say that all stress is necessarily bad, if that makes sense. I know, which is like a lot of times we don't equate it to that way, but
right. And then there's and it's good. So when we pause on cortisol levels, it's also really important that we talk about how it's relative to the situation.
Yeah.
And so I know that you have some thoughts on this, Chelsea, but one thing that was interesting was when they did measure cortisol levels for sleep training, right?
Yeah.
I think it was no more than the same cortisol levels that a child experiences at daycare.
Yeah.
And you're not going to not put your child in daycare.
You're not going to not work. Yeah.
It's like the benefits, right? So it's like, oh, at the other side of it, again, if we're just talking about general sleep training, we're not talking about our method, but you also then have a choice to make with your family of that short-term cortisol increase and, the benefit that they'll get from actually sleeping well long-term.
Well, that's actually, sorry, you guys, we like keep on, we're all about like the research and the data and the articles. So those of you who know us, we are all like, let me give you the evidence, because we just really are truly evidence-based sleep coaches, to be frank with you. But it was really interesting because I was also reading another article where it was talking about toddlers and preschoolers, and they were saying that toddlers that experience broken sleep kind of over a period of time actually have a higher base cortisol level compared, or that stress hormone, compared to toddlers or preschoolers that are getting really good, consistent, consolidated sleep. And so that their overall stress within their body is actually overall decrease. And then same with babies, that same cortisol level is actually lower within babies who are also getting consistent and consolidated sleep.
So can we actually, I would love to read this and share this.
Sure.
This is from Harvard Health.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's hear it.
To measure the effects on the babies, the researchers did something interesting. They measured the level of cortisol, a stress hormone, in baby saliva. They also asked some mothers about their stress level. 12 months later, they looked for any emotional or behavioral problems in babies, and they also did testing to see how attached the babies were to their mothers. Here's what they found. The babies in the graduated extinction group, right? So we're calling this Ferber, right? Leave and check. And the bedtime fading group, first of all, bedtime fading, it's not truly sleep training. It's just you move around schedules and you get them required. And so there's differences in crying there. Both of them fell asleep faster and had less stress than the control group, which was just nothing was applied.
Yeah.
Mothers were less stressed than the control group mothers. And of these three groups, the extinction group babies were less likely to wake again during the night. So again, the group that actually applied a sleep training method, specifically leave and check, into emotional or behavioral problems or attachment, all three groups were
the same. We're the same. And so that really goes to like the long term, right? And so kind of to pull it back, I think what we're trying to say here, you guys, is that all of these methods, all of these, really decisions you're making as family, what you feel like works for you and for your family, really shows that at the end of the day, getting good, consistent, and consolidated sleep, however you go about doing that, is actually of most benefit to your child. And that there is really, truly no long-term effects of whichever method that you choose. Okay. That really at the end of the day, right, Mica, it really just goes back to sleep and helping your child get the sleep needs that they need, right? Meet the sleep needs that they need.
Now, I want to caveat that though.
Okay, go for it.
Broad statement, right?
It is a broad statement, yeah.
I'm not going to lie, and I am the tough love coach.
Yeah.
And
really?
tough love coach.
Yeah.
I tell you, however, I mean, there is going to be there can be a way to sleep train your child without playing or flirting with prolonged crying. So,
Yes.
right.
So,
And talking
yep,
about the negative stuff,
I
right?
know. Yeah, yeah.
So I want to say, yes, whatever is right for your child, sleep training, right? And we always say, you're only going to sleep train if what you have right now is unsustainable. And if your entire family is not getting sleep, if
Yeah.
it's sustainable, you're
If it's
great.
working for you,
Awesome.
awesome.
Love
Seriously.
it. If it's
Yeah.
not, and you need to sleep train, right? Know that if you do it in a way that is supportive and responsive
Responsive.
and for a purpose, all pediatricians will actually support sleep training in general. But there is a right way to, I hate saying right, but there is a right way to do it. We don't want you to have prolonged crying of sleep training for weeks, which
Right. And that's what we mean by the right way of doing it. Like
yeah,
in terms of like setting it up and having a plan so that you and your child doesn't necessarily have to experience that.
prolonged crying. Let's
Yeah,
just
prolonged crying.
crying.
Okay, I'm going to say this one. I'm going to read this one more thing, and then let's kind of bring it back to that. Okay, because I think it kind of plays into it. So in another study, I'm quoting it here. So when 3 to 6 month old babies play with a sensitive, or in other words, a responsive mother for 15 minutes, their cortisol decreases. And then so if sleep deprivation is affecting a parent's ability to be responsive, then during the day, then that could also increase your child's exposure. Now I'm going to exposure, I should say, to cortisol. Now, the reason I bring this up is because of our own experiences, right, Mica? You know, you guys have heard me talk about this before, but I did have pretty severe postpartum depression. And I will be honest in that I feel like I was, maybe physically there for my child. I do not think that I was necessarily always there emotionally for my child in that very beginning stage. And so, really helping her to get better sleep, me to get better sleep, and really reduce that overall sleep deprivation for our entire family, it did reduce that stress, I think for everyone involved. So sorry to digress, but let's go back though to what we were saying though with how we reduce that prolonged crying, because that is something to reduce, because that can be stressful, right? And kind of hearing your child cry, that 100% can be stressful. And so, Mica, what do we do to help to reduce that, to set our kids up honestly for success and to help to reduce that prolonged crying?
Yeah. So first, I think it's just really our philosophy about sleep and crying in general. So you'd mentioned, Chelsea, that there's three different stress buckets, so to
Yeah.
speak. And that means there's different colors of crying. So I always start off when we talk to our families is, we can't always assume that the first reason why our children are crying is because they are in distress. Distress is a very general word too. Now we know that anytime there is change, small amount of change, right? You're getting waffles this morning instead of pancakes.
Yeah.
Cause crying. And yes, there is unregulated crying, and then we have what is called responsive guidance during crying. So the first thing we say is when we look at helping our children learn that they are safe when they fall asleep independently, because let's be real, Chelsea, we are not teaching babies how to fall asleep independently.
They biologically know how to do that. We're telling them it's okay to do that. Yeah.
They don't need other things. So the first thing is that we say that crying is going to be a form of communication. And when we talk about our method, it is about crying is a request for guidance. They need to know what's happening next, in which case we do not have prolonged crying and we don't have unregulated crying. Our method requires that you are actually responsive and provide guidance. And I would say that in addition to really focusing on aligning to biological rhythms and making sure that the right sleep pressure and desire to sleep quickly is appropriated between night and day is what helps our families stay really, really far away from long crying. But
Yeah.
I love sharing this. Chelsea, we've had what, 30 something people in a group coaching. We've had quite a few of them go through their first week. Do you want to share some of the average
Well, I was
time?
just saying, I was actually going to look at the group specifically because we had one mom who baby went to sleep after 23 minutes. We had another one. This is night one, you guys. Okay. Night one of bedtime strategies. We had another mom, a 12-week-old, 11 minutes on their first night. But I would say on average, it's hovering around 40-45 minutes. And the reason being, like Mica was talking about, is because before we even begin to implement our specific method of being responsive to the child and guiding them to know that that's okay, is we are, I say, setting them up for success, right? We're really kind of balancing that desire for sleep so that they aren't overtired, they aren't undertired, and so that their body is honestly just able to naturally fall asleep easier. And so by doing so, that greatly reduces going into that first night, just a period of crying. Now, Mica and I always say we don't necessarily take away crying, just because particularly with babies, I mean, that's the biggest way that they can really communicate with you, right, you guys? And so, what we're trying to do though is to let them know that it's okay, still be responsive, but also be really consistent in our response so that that confusion that they might be feeling right now really quickly decreases.
There's
That,
guidance because
yeah.
telling them as opposed to not communicating. And I do want to mention when Chelsea says 45 minutes, I will tell you that a lot of our, especially recently, we've really honed in on how important aligning to your child's natural sleep rhythms are. It really is a lot less than that. And 45 minutes is not of all crying.
No, it's not continual crying.
It's just from
No,
time from bedtime where they lay down
in the crib or bassinet
to the
to,
time that they fall asleep.
yeah.
So yes, our families are experiencing varied, some are just, hey, nothing's happening for 10 minutes,
What do I do?
it's like, or you do nothing because they're not asking.
They're doing fine. Yeah.
So I just, yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and that's the thing. And a lot of times we give like specific guidance too on, where to not make changes, where to make changes, to not, essentially to decrease that additional crying, right? For our clients, and that's to say for all ages. And one thing that is really important to Mica and I is that we are really addressing the child where they are developmentally, and so how we can help to reduce that prolonged crying looks very different in a 10-week-old baby as it does from a 10-month-old baby. That looks completely different. And so at the end of the day, yes, that is always at the center or in the back of our minds. How can we help your child obviously to sleep better? Because I mean, that's the biggest part, right? But how can we do it in a way that is as smooth of a transition for you as parents, for baby, yeah, who is responsive, and honestly, how we can get to that more peaceful sleep fastest. We had actually a client just I think it was yesterday, we were like sharing some like celebrations essentially. And she was like, my son, he loves his bed. He pushes against me, wants to go into his crib and just kind of babbles to himself and plays for about 5 or 10 minutes before he dozes off. This baby is 7 months, Mica. Is that correct? I was about to say, I think he started when he was 6.5, not, no, he's 7. And you know, we love our beds. Do you love your bed, Mica?
My
I
bad.
love my bed. So we want to guide your child to know it is okay to love your bed. It is okay to want to go to sleep. Right. And it honestly, that's kind of my favorite part though, too, is when we hear that. So
Child also is an exception, especially if you are aligning to where they are. I mean, there is a way. And I remember that same family that you just talked about. I remember having a conversation with his mom, and it was, I just don't know.
he's really stubborn.
Really stubborn.
Yeah.
And look at that. 2 weeks. We did not even make it to the 2 week
No,
of
she sleep through the night on night 3, Mica.
night three.
Yeah.
So I mean, yes.
It,
Anyways,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, we digress. We just love our clients. We love our babies. But I think that it really goes, there's just so many layers, right, Mica? And I think that for me in this episode, what I'm really trying to do to all of you parents that are listening, watching, I just want to reassure you, right? That, helping your child to learn how to sleep in a very consistent way.
Routine. Yeah.
Sleep routine, sorry.
Not
Sleep
teaching.
You're
We don't
not teaching.
sleep. They
No,
know how
they
can
know how to do it. So, but guiding them in a consistent way, it in a responsive way, not only will help your child to get there on a consistent basis, but it will let your child know that you are there for them. And that in and of itself can also help to reduce prolonged crying when it's done in a very consistent, methodical way, which is something that we obviously provide you guys a script and a blueprint on how to do that. But I just want to go back to that, what if you are feeling like this is right for you and for your family, and this feels good to be responsive and to guide your child to do that, then that is amazing. That please know that any crying is short-lived. It is not an instance where it will be prolonged crying over weeks upon weeks. It really is just a small amount of time that you will experience some crying within that transition.
Yeah.
So.
When done, really, it's just when done with purpose. You're not evil if you want to sleep train. You're not gonna impact your child's attachment over a couple of days.
And that's a whole other podcast topic too.
Yeah, there's so I mean, at the end, right, we always have tips.
I was just about to go there. So yes, you guys. So at the end of every episode, we give you about 2 to 3 actionable sleep tips as it relates to our topic. And so your rested mama sleep tips today, I kind of want to get like a little jingle. I wish we had like a little jingle before we do our sleep tips. So maybe that's coming.
Sleep tips. How about that?
I love your jingle, Mica. We should record you. Well, if you guys are listening, let's do a jingle next time. But okay, let's dive into these ones today. And then it really is surrounding that topic of sleep training and crying and all of that encompassing. And the first one is there are different methods you can utilize that works for your child that can impact crying. Can you dive into that a little bit more in detail?
Yeah, I think it goes back to making sure that when you do start, have a plan, but sleep training doesn't have to be equivalent to prolonged crying and harmfulness.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't have to be synonymous, right?
No.
You can be responsive to your child. You can avoid prolonged crying, which basically blows away all the other pieces of opinions and articles that are out there that say it's bad. So don't let that stop you. There is a way.
No. And also don't let it stop you too if you feel like you need to make a little switch. I mean, we get clients all the time, you guys, that have started with Ferber or have started sleep training with Cry It Out, and they feel like there's a little piece missing there. And so that's also something to also know that it's okay to kind of switch gears a little bit if you feel like it's not really working for you or for your family. So And then the second one is to help reduce crying. Honestly, the biggest tip that Mica and I can give you is just to stay very consistent with your routines and your responses. Again, kind of goes back to that confusion piece. Whether it's a baby or a toddler, a lot of times where, we experience some crying with our child, it's just when they are confused. And so the best thing that we can do to help to reduce that, obviously, is to stay very consistent with your responses as well as those routines as well. And then the last one, Mica, number 3, you want to close us off with our tips?
Yes. When we talk about crying, in general, our biggest tip is listen to your child's cry. I don't know how many families have actually worked with us.
Yeah.
Where this is part of our consult. We tell them, right, listen to the cry, really try to understand what is your child asking for. And they say, oh my gosh, I don't think I even realized my child had
different,
many different cries, right? We think of hunger cry, I need
cry. Yeah.
There's so many more. Listen to that. Take a moment and pause and, really try to understand what they're asking for.
And because it is really almost like their own little language, they are communicating to you. And so, yeah, it is. It's fun to see parents really almost getting to know their child in a completely different way. Because, they're humans just like us. They're desiring that communication with you. So, as we wrap up, Mica, one thing I just would like to say is that we know that there are lots of kind of concerns and emotions and feelings regarding this topic. And please know, Mica and I are ones that we welcome this conversation. And we are happy to talk through it more in depth with you. Even if you have some specific questions, like we always say, we are real people on the other side of this podcast. So just know that too. Please feel free to use us as a resource as well. So anyway, last little tidbit there, Mica. So, and hey, Mica is headed out of town, and she is getting ready to go with her family on a nice vacation. And I am going to miss you, my Mica. But I hope that you have a wonderful vacation with your family. I'm excited to hear all about it. So, well, thank you, my other half, my better half of Rested Mama Happy Baby.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you. We'll talk to you guys soon, and make sure that you always stay
rested.
Awesome. Bye, guys. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of Rested Mamas Talk. To stay connected and get more sleep tips from us, follow us on our Instagram page at rested_mama_happy_baby.
To find out how we're helping families around the world get better sleep, check out our website, restedmamahappybaby.com, or chat with us directly to learn more about our programs. Chat with you next time.